Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am here at the grassy knoll where the Rothschilds, the Warbirds, these oligarchical psychopaths,
among other international banking elite, committed the biggest coup d'etat in American history. With the help of the highest levels of the military-industrial complex and the Central Intelligence Agency, they slayed the 35th President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The key for the agency that day was triangulation of crossfire. They had several shooters on hand that day, and various reports of shots coming from behind the grassy knoll were omitted by the Warren Commission, the group appointed in investigating the death of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Of course, the Warren Commission consisted of CIA and government cronies of the highest level that LBJ could trust. One example of these reports being omitted is the Newman family. Bill Newman, who has famously stated that he heard shots coming from behind the knoll, grabs his family and takes cover after hearing those shots. That is the evidence the perpetrators of this conspiracy did not count on. There's also the testimony of railroad attendant Lee Bowers, who stated that around 10 a.m. to noon, the day of the president's murder, there had been strange activity, that Houston and Elm had been blocked off due to the parade route, but regardless, 3 automobiles, what looked like a Cadillac, were able to enter the parking lot in the grassy knoll area. And Lee Bowers stated that during the time of the shooting, he felt something out of the ordinary had happened behind the knoll. Shortly after giving his testimony, Lee Bowers was found dead on a lone highway in Texas. Here we can see a picture of 2 key eyewitnesses, Gene Hill and Mary Mormon, who had front row seats to this parade of death. They were later debriefed by the FBI, interrogated, and they were told they could only say they heard 3 shots, although they were certain they had heard 4 or 6. Here we see a picture of actress Jo Anderson portraying Julianne Mercer in Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK. A woman who positively identified Jack Ruby a day before the shooting, and also she admitted that her statements were twisted by the Warren Commission. Executive Order 11110. Since 1961, President Kennedy had been working diligently to halt sales of silver by the Treasury Department, who in return was issuing worthless paper dollars issued by the Federal Reserve. Paper dollars that are basically debt. JFK wanted to replace that with silver and expand the industrial demand for the use of silver coins, which of course would have resulted in the first official audit of the Federal Reserve. Executive Order 11110 was signed and issued by President John F. Kennedy June 4, 1963, and it's partly why many believe the central banking institutions took aim at JFK. The bankers weren't the only ones who wanted to see JFK die. 3 months after JFK assumed the presidency, he was tricked by the CIA, falling for a plot to invade Cuba, spearheaded by Cuban exiles who were angry with Castro's communist dictatorship, fighting alongside the CIA for the United States. Kennedy shot down Operation Northwoods, and he promised to split the agency in half, basically having all paramilitary operations fall under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Operation Northwoods would have basically given a green light to the CIA to stage false flag events, false flag terror, in this case, blaming it on the communist Castro regime, thus warranting an invasion of Cuba.
None of this information is featured at the 6th Floor Museum's tour guide, and I figured if I wasn't allowed to take any pictures or interview anybody at the 6th Floor Museum, I'd conduct my own independent investigation outside.
Do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
That's not a quick question. It's hard to say yes to that. I think I would lean toward that.
Even the plaque at the museum formerly known as the Texas School Book Depository states that Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly shot the president. No matter how much overwhelming evidence you bring to the people, it seems that they don't want to hear it.
Do you think that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone? You do? I was just wondering if you guys thought that Oswald acted alone.
Yes.
You do? Even though there's overwhelming evidence that states that he did not. You guys are familiar with Operation 40? Do you guys believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
Yes.
You do?
I do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
What type of sick individuals laugh and smirk and grin when asked about the horrendous death of their commander-in-chief? It reminded me of a certain individual who did the same thing.
Keep his promise, even the dark clouds of political crisis gathered over America. After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy, our nation turned to Gerald Ford.
The 43rd President of the United States and former Director of Central Intelligence, who replaced William Colby, should recall November 22nd, 1963 quite well, being that he was on hand. He was there with the CIA as a young CIA operative. Now here we can see pictures of the infamous tramps, the hobos that were detained from the Grassy Knoll area. Make note that the Dallas PD, the FBI, they did not save or make a memo of any of the questions that they asked these hobos, and one of them is suspected of being longtime CIA officer E. Howard Hunt. Notice how they are clean cut, clean shape, seem to have new shoes. Clearly not your average hobos. Listen to this deathbed confession given by longtime CIA officer E. Howard Hunt.
Spurriers and Morales and people of that ilk stayed in apartment houses during preparations for the big events. And their addresses were very subject to change. I was a bench warmer on it. We backtracked the chain of command during the run-up for the big event.
Now, Hunt was the personal assistant to none other than Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA at the time, who was fired by the Kennedy administration. Later, Dulles is on the Warren Commission. Hunt was also the acting CIA station chief in Mexico City around the time of September 1963 when Oswald supposedly visited Mexico City.
OSWALD.
I didn't shoot anybody, no sir. They have taken me in because of the fact I have lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
During that very short and sweet hearing, I really don't know what this situation is about. Nobody has told me anything except that I'm accused of murdering a policeman I know nothing more than that, and I do request someone to come forward to give me a legal assistance.
Along with being a decorated CIA officer, E. Howard Hunt was also a writer and published a novel titled Bimini Run in 1949, a novel that parallels the life of Frank Sturgis, a member of Operation 40, and one of the Watergate burglars. E. Howard Hunt also took part in the bugging of the Democratic National Convention and testified before the Senate Watergate Committee in Washington, D.C. on September 24, 1973. E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis were both members of the White House Plumbers, and it is suspected that the tramp in the middle is Frank Sturgis. The whole magnitude of the Kennedy assassination is similar to that of a Shakespearean novel, a tragic story of betrayal and lies and murder. And Lee Harvey Oswald is nothing more than a pawn, a patsy for the Central Intelligence Agency, perhaps the original patsy. And at the same time, he is never mourned for the tragic character that he truly was. Now, Oswald enlisted in the Marine Corps October 24, 1956, the day after his 17th birthday. Oswald was given Russian language exams under the Department of Naval Intelligence. And between the times of October 1959 and through June 1962, this former Marine defected to the Soviet Union, presumably with the KGB. But it is highly theorized that Lee Harvey Oswald was in fact a double agent working with the Central Intelligence Agency. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover wrote a memo in 1960 stating that there was a possibility someone was using Oswald's identity and passport. Later, Hoover stated that this obvious imposter we see in these pictures here was actually Oswald himself at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, again setting the stage for Oswald to be blamed as a communist leftist and to galvanize the American public into accepting an all-out invasion of Cuba and to have the blame laid at Fidel Castro's doorstep.
I didn't shoot anybody. I didn't shoot anybody, no sir. They have taken me in. The fact I have lived in the Soviet Union, I'm just a patsy.
Nobody has told me anything except that I'm accused of murdering a policeman. I know nothing more than that, and I do request someone to come forward to give me a legal assistance.
That came from Janet Williams
Well,
Garage.
I never saw this picture. That is my face, but my face has been superimposed. The rest of the picture is not me at all. I have done a lot of photographic work, and that picture was made by someone else.
When Oswald was a Marine, he was a radar operator, stationed in a top-secret spy base in Japan that oversaw top-secret U-2 spy flights over Russia. Shortly after arriving in Russia, Oswald met his future wife, Marina, whose uncle just happened to be a colonel in Soviet intelligence. 6 months after Lee Harvey Oswald's arrival in Russia, Francis Gary Powers' U-2 spy plane was shot down during a reconnaissance mission over Soviet Union airspace. This incident was later known as the 1960 U-2 incident, which resulted in a failed peace treaty between Eisenhower and Khrushchev. Many people believe Oswald was behind this, including Francis Gary Powers. Lee Harvey Oswald was never a true defector. He was, and always will be, a CIA agent. Oswald was living in Russia May 1st, 1960, and traveled from Minsk to Moscow for the U-2 Powers spy trial. The man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald was Jack Rubenstein, also known as Jack Ruby, an admitted mobster who ran the Carousel Club with ties to the Dallas mob and who basically had the Dallas Police Department in his pocket. One of Rubenstein's former dancers, known as Beverly, spoke with the District Attorney of New Orleans, Jim Garrison, regarding her meeting Lee Harvey Oswald through Jack Rubenstein at the Carousel Club. There's also the testimony of deceased prostitute and dope runner who worked for Jack Rubenstein, Rosie Cherami, who admitted that Rubenstein had known Oswald for years. She was found dead due to a hit and run. After Ruby's conviction in March of 1964, Ruby's lawyer, Sam Houston Clinton, argued that Ruby could not get a fair trial in the city of Dallas due to the publicity pertaining to the case. A year after his conviction in March 1965, Ruby stated during a live television conference, "Everything pertaining to what's happening has come to surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred. My motives, the people who had so much to gain and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in the position I'm in, will never let the true facts come above board to the world." Jack Ruby died before they could arrange a new trial date for him of a pulmonary embolism on January 3rd, 1967 at Parkland Hospital, where Oswald and President Kennedy were also pronounced dead. And according to a journalist at the Associated Press, Ruby left a final statement saying that he alone was responsible for Oswald's death and no one else. Sheriff Al Maddox said, "Ruby told me, well, they injected me for a cold. He said it was cancer cells." Many of his friends said that Ruby would be the worst person to have involved in a criminal conspiracy because he just talked too much. Let's go through the list of historical suspects in this criminal conspiracy, starting with Oswald's suspected CIA handler, George de Mohrenschildt. De Mohrenschildt was introduced to the Oswalds in 1962 through alleged government agent Walter Moore. De Mohrenschildt helps Oswald land a job making maps for the U.S. Army. De Mohrenschildt describes Oswald as an intellectual man who adored JFK, but during his testimony to the Warren Commission, he describes Oswald as a violent and potentially dangerous man. De Mohrenschildt also had close ties to George Herbert Walker Bush. Here we see a picture of Dave Ferry, who served with Lee Harvey Oswald in the same Civil Air Patrol in the 1950s. Ferry had been working with private investigator Guy Bannister, who was also an ex-ONI agent, with a group of right-wing extremists that included Cuban refugees who were involved in a conspiracy, along with elements of the CIA, to kill President John F. Kennedy. On February 22, 1967, a week after news of Jim Garrison investigations broke, David Ferry was found dead in his apartment. It was considered a suicide. Ferry had told Jim Garrison that he was part of a paramilitary black operation known as Operation Mongoose, similar to Operation Northwoods and Operation 40. These paramilitary black operations were designed at constructing a clandestine war effort against Cuba. Clay Laverne Shaw, also known as Clay Bertrand, was a businessman in New Orleans, Louisiana, and the only person to be prosecuted in connection with the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He was found not guilty. But in 1979, former director of the CIA Richard Helms testified under oath that Shaw had been in fact a contract agent for the CIA. Clay Shaw hired Dean Andrews to take care of Lee Harvey Oswald's Marine discharge. Attorney Dean Andrews was questioned by Jim Garrison in regards to his statements given to the Warren Commission, in which Andrews states that a man named Clay Bertrand called him shortly after the JFK assassination to represent the suspected killer, Lee Harvey Oswald. Later, the FBI reports that 2 weeks after the assassination, Andrews had been hospitalized with pneumonia and was under heavy sedation. Andrews later states that the call had been a figment of his imagination. Most of the information covered in my news piece can be researched in Jim Garrison's book, On the Trail of the Assassin. Jim Garrison, just like I, contests the magic bullet theory, the fact that there has never been a bullet as active as the one that struck Kennedy and Governor Connally in the history of combat. Here we see a picture of Earl Cabell, a Texas politician and mayor of Dallas, Texas at the time of the Kennedy assassination. Cabell would have been the only one able to change the parade route. Earl's brother, Charles Cabell, was also the deputy director of Central Intelligence until he resigned or was fired in the wake of the Bay of Pigs invasion by the Kennedy administration. Charles Cabell then returned to the Pentagon and stated that Kennedy was a traitor, again further solidifying a consensus of interests between the military-industrial complex and the Central Intelligence Agency to oust the 35th President of the United States. The inner workings of a criminal conspiracy all point the blame at the intelligence community of the United States of America. The chain of evidence not only points to a cover-up, but also the agency's direct involvement in this coup d'etat. Oswald, his connections to the CIA, Hoover's FBI, with Lyndon Baines Johnson pulling the strings at the very top of the big oil conglomerates and the mob, General Y at the Pentagon in charge of Operation Mongoose, and the Secret Service, all working together November 22nd, 1963. The fact that the chain of evidence was treated as a circus, an exhibition for the mainstream media at the time. Ask yourself, is that the proper handling of evidence? And the fact that Hoover's FBI wants you to believe that from atop the 6th floor at the Texas School Book Depository, Oswald was able to hit a moving target through heavy foliage with a manual bolt-action rifle and was able to fire 3 shots in under 5.6 seconds. Oswald's performance could not be replicated in 3 sets conducted by the FBI with their best sharpshooters. Oswald met with the FBI 2 weeks before the Kennedy assassination. He apparently left a memo for a special agent Hosty. Hosty later claimed that it was a threat, but the note was destroyed. You figured they would have kept it to further mount more evidence on the case that he was a lone nut, but it is speculated that he was an informant for the FBI as well, that he had infiltrated the right-wing organization that consisted of Cuban exiles who benefited from this cover-up. The man in charge of Operation 40 and former Vice President and the 37th President of the United States, Richard Milhouse Nixon. Gerald Ford was a member of the Warren Commission and later became the 38th President of the United States. The big oil conglomerates, the banksters, all friends of the future 41st President of the United States and Director of Central Intelligence, George Herbert Walker Bush. And of course Kennedy's successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the proud Texan with the big oil connections, and who some people said had an almost maniacal lust to become president, at the very top of the list of suspects.
I want you to know I'm not going to let Vietnam go like China did. I'm personally committed. And I'm not going to take one soldier out of there until they know we mean business in Asia. No, I'm not going to let Vietnam go like China did. I'm personally committed.
Yes. Familiar with this proposed group that they try and put together on this study of your report and other things, 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, somebody in the court, a couple outsiders.
No, I haven't heard of that. I've seen the reports on the Senate investigating committee that they've been talking about.
Yeah, well, we think if we don't have, I want to get by just with your file and your report.
I think it'd be very, very bad to have a rash of investigations.
Well, the only way we can stop them is probably to appoint a high-level one to evaluate your report.
Yeah.
And put somebody that's pretty good on it from that I could select out of the government and tell the House and Senate not to go ahead with the investigation.
Yes.
Because we get up there and get a bunch of television going, and I thought it'd be bad.
It'd be a 3-ring circus.
Yeah. What do you think about Allen Dulles?
I think he would be a good man.
What do you think about John McCloy?
I'm not as enthusiastic about McCloy. I knew him back in the when Patterson's down here, the secretary thing. He's a good man, but I'm not so certain as to the matter of the publicity that he might seek on it.
Mm-hmm. What about General Nordstrom?
Good man.
I guess Boggs has started in the house. I thought maybe I might try to get Boggs and Jerry Ford in the House, maybe try to get Dick Russell and maybe Cooper in the Senate.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know. You know anything? Any reason? Just talking to me and you're going to talk like brothers.
Yeah.
No other reason. Any reason? Any there? I thought Russell could kind of look after the general situation, see that the states and their relations.
Russell would be an excellent man.
And I thought Cooper might look after the liberal group.
Who's that?
Cooper from Kentucky.
Oh, yeah, Cooper.
So they wouldn't think that he's a pretty judicious fellow,
yeah.
But he's a pretty liberal fellow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want Javits or some of those fellows on it.
Javits plays the front page.
Cooper's kind of border state.
Yes.
It's not the South. It's not the North.
That's right.
Do you know Ford from Michigan?
I know of him, but I don't know him. I saw him on TV the other night for the first time. He handled himself well on that.
No Boggs?
Oh, yes, I know Boggs.
He's kind of off of the resolution.
Yes, I know him.
Now, Walter Jenkins, that you've designated Deke to work with us like you did on the Hill.
I have, yes.
I tell you, I sure appreciate that. I didn't ask for it because I knew you knew how to run your business better than anybody else. And I just want to tell you, though, that we consider him as high class as you do, and it's a mighty gracious thing to do, and we'd be mighty happy. And we salute you for knowing how to pick good men.
Well, that's mighty nice of you, President, indeed. We hope to have this thing wrapped up today, but we probably won't get it before the first week. This angle in Mexico is giving us a great deal of trouble because the stories there of this man, Oswald, getting $6,500 from the Cuban embassy and then coming back to this country with it. We're not able to prove that fact. The information was that he was there on the 18th of September in Mexico City, and we are able to prove conclusively he was in New Orleans that day. Now then they changed the date. The story came in changing the date to the 28th of September, and he was in Mexico City on the 28th. Now the Mexican police have again arrested this woman, Duran, who's a member of the Cuban embassy, and we'll hold her for 2 or 3 more days. And we're going to confront her with the original informant who stole the money past, so he says, and we're also going to put the lie detector test on him. Meantime, of course, Castro's hollering his head off.
Can you pay attention to those lie detector tests?
I would not pay 100% attention to them. All that they are is a psychological asset in an investigation. I wouldn't want to be a part to sending a man to the chair on a lie detector. For instance, we have found many cases where we've used them and in a bank where there's been embezzlement, and a person will confess before the lie detector test is finished, more or less fearful of the fact that the lie detector test will show them guilty. Psychologically, there's that advantage because it's a misnomer to call it a lie detector, because what it really is the evaluation of the chart that is made by this machine. And that evaluation is made by a human being. And any human being can be apt to make a wrong interpretation. So I would not myself go on that alone. If, on the other hand, if this fellow Oswald had lived and had taken the lie detector test and it had shown definitely that he had done these various things, together with the evidence that we very definitely have, it would have just added that much more strength to it. There's no question but that he is the man. Now, the fingerprints and things that we have. This fellow Rubenstein down there, he has offered to take the lie detector test, but his lawyer's got to be consulted first, and I doubt whether the lawyer will allow him. He's one of these criminal lawyers from the West Coast, and somewhat like a Edward Bennett Williams type, and almost as much of a shyster.
Have you got any relationship between the two yet?
Between Rubenstein?
Yeah.
No, at the present time we have not. There was a story down there that...
Was he ever in his bar and stuff like that?
There was a story that this fellow had been in this nightclub, this strip-tease joint that he has, but that has not been able to be confirmed. Now, this fellow Rubenstein is a very shady character, has a bad record, street brawler, fighter, and that sort of thing. And in the place in Dallas, if a fellow came in there and couldn't pay his bill completely, Rubenstein would beat the very devil out of him and throw him out of the place. He was that kind of a fellow. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, boasted about that. He is what I would put in the category one of the egomaniacs. He likes to be in the limelight. He knew all the police in that white light district where the joints are in there, and he also let them come in, see the show, get food, and get liquor, and so forth. That's how I think he got into police headquarters, because they accepted him as kind of a police character hanging around police headquarters, and for that reason raised no question. Of course, they never made any moves as the pictures show, even when they saw him approaching this fella, and got up right to him and pressed his pistol against Oswald's stomach. Neither of the police officers on either side made any moves to push him away or to grab him. It wasn't until after the gun was fired that they then moved. Now, of course, that is not the highest degree of efficiency, so to say. Secondly, the chief of police admits that he moved him in the morning as a convenience and at the request of the motion picture people who wanted to have daylight. He should have moved him at night, but he didn't. And, those derelictions in that phase. But so far as tying Rubenstein and Oswald together, we haven't as yet done so. There have been a number of stories come in. We've tied Oswald into the Civil Liberties Union in New York, membership into that, and then, of course, into this this Cuban Fair Play Committee, which was pro-Castro and dominated by communism and financed to some extent by the Castro government.
How many shots were fired?
3.
Any of them fired at me?
No,
all 3 at the president.
All 3 at the president, and we have them. 2 of the shots fired at the president were splintered, but they had characteristics on them so that our ballistic expert was able to prove that they were fired by this gun. The third shot, which hit the president, he was hit by the first and the third. The second shot hit the governor. The third shot is a complete bullet that wasn't shattered, and that rolled out of the president's head. It tore a large part of the president's head off. And in trying to massage his heart at the hospital, on the way to the hospital, they apparently loosened that, and it fell onto the stretcher, and we recovered that. And we have that, and we have the gun here also.
Were they aiming at the president?
They were aiming directly at the president. There's no question about that. This telescopic lens, which I've looked through, it brings a person as close to you as if they were sitting right beside you. And we also have tested the fact that you could fire, those 3 shots were fired within 3 seconds. There's been some stories going around in the papers and so forth that that must have been more than one man, but because no one man could fire those shots in the time that they were fired. We've just proved that by the actual test that we've made.
How did it happen? They hit Connolly.
Connolly turned to the president when the first shot was fired, and I think in that turning it was where he got hit.
If he hadn't turned, he probably wouldn't have got hit.
I think that's very likely.
When the president got hit the second one?
No, the president wasn't hit with the second one.
I see if Connolly hadn't been his way.
Oh yes. The president no doubt would have been hit.
He's been hit 3 times.
He's been hit 3 times.
The top players of this criminal conspiracy state, there's no doubt he would have been hit. With 3 teams consisting of black ops snipers, President Kennedy didn't stand a chance. Those snipers were members of an elite assassination squad known as Operation 40, designed at killing Castro under the direction of Vice President Richard Nixon during the Eisenhower administration. Many believe that the 1972 break-in at the Democratic National Convention was a result of Richard Nixon trying to cover up any pertinent facts that linked him to Operation 40, thus linking him to the Kennedy assassination.
Again, the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
At least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. and we are all mortal. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.